The snow didn't just cover the mountains that day. It swallowed sound, memory, and mercy. At 75, her breath came shallow as she stood at the edge of the frozen pit, wind clawing at her shawl like it wanted to pull her in next. Her knees ached, her fingers were stiff with cold, and every sensible voice in her head begged her to turn back. Then she heard it. Not loud, not dramatic, just a thin, trembling sound barely strong enough to survive the wind, a cry that didn't belong to the mountain. She leaned forward, heart pounding, and saw two pale eyes staring up from the darkness below, wide with terror and confusion. A snow leopard cub, alone, trapped, its small body pressed against ice that had already decided it wouldn't let go easily. She had lived a long life, buried a husband, watched seasons steal friends one by one, learned how fragile warmth really is, but in that moment, none of that mattered. All that existed was the cold biting her skin, the cub's shallow breaths echoing from the pit, and a quiet, terrifying truth settling into her bones. If she walked away now, the mountain would finish the story before sunrise. The cold had a way of slipping past clothes and settling directly into memory. At 75, she had learned to recognize that feeling, the kind that didn't just chill the skin but pressed inward against the chest, where old grief slept lightly. The morning sky was a dull sheet of gray, heavy and unmoving, as if the mountains themselves were holding their breath. Snow lay thick across the path, unbroken except for her careful footprints, each step deliberate, each breath slower than the last. She had not planned to come this far. She never did anymore. Age had taught her caution, had taught her how easily one wrong step could become a final one. She paused near the edge of the pit without realizing it at first. The land dipped suddenly, the ground collapsing inward as if the earth itself had grown tired and caved. Wind rushed upward from the hollow, sharp and metallic, carrying with it the scent of ice and old stone. She leaned on her walking stick, chest rising and falling, heart thudding with the stubborn insistence of something that refused to quit even when sense said it should. That was when she heard it. At first she thought it was the wind twisting itself into another cruel sound. The mountains were full of tricks like that. But this was different, thinner. She stepped closer, boots sliding slightly on packed snow, and peered down into the darkness. The pit swallowed light. Its walls were slick with ice, layered in years of frozen melt, glinting faintly like broken glass. Far below, pressed against the cold earth, something small shifted. Two pale eyes lifted toward her, reflecting fear so raw it felt like a physical blow. A snow leopard cub. Too young, too alone. Its spotted fur was dusted with frost, chest fluttering in shallow, uneven breath. It opened its mouth again, and the sound that came out barely survived the air before breaking apart. Her hands began to shake, not entirely from the cold. She had lived long enough to know that moments like this were never accidental. Life didn't ask questions kindly at her age. It asked them sharply without mercy. She thought of her husband gone these many winters now, of the long nights after his death when silence felt heavier than any snowstorm. She thought of the children she had raised, now scattered far from these mountains, voices reduced to phone calls and fading echoes. She had learned how to let go, or at least she thought she had. The cub shifted again, claws scraping weakly against ice that offered no grip. Its body was already slowing, conserving what little warmth remained. She imagined the night that would come if she turned away, the temperature plunging, the wind settling into the pit like a final lid. Her heart hammered so loudly she wondered if the cub could hear it echoing down the pit. "I'm coming," she murmured, unsure whether she was speaking to the animal or to herself. The words felt fragile, almost foolish, but once spoken they anchored her more firmly than any knot. She eased herself over the edge, weight shifting carefully, boots searching for purchase against ice-slick stone. The cold intensified instantly, rushing upward, wrapping around her legs like grasping hands. Her arms strained as she lowered herself inch by inch, muscles protesting with a deep, aching burn. The pit walls glistened inches from her shoulders, close enough to brush against, shedding tiny shards of ice that rattled down into darkness. Halfway down, her strength wavered. Her breath came ragged now, chest tightening, fear threatening to bloom into panic. She pressed her forehead briefly against the frozen wall, eyes closed, letting the cold shock her back into focus. She thought of all the times she had endured worse, long winters without enough food, nights of grief so heavy she wasn't sure she would survive them. She was still here, still capable of choosing this moment. She opened her eyes and looked down. The cub stared back, pupils wide, body trembling but alive. That was enough. She tightened her grip, ignoring the pain screaming through her arms, and continued her descent, each movement slow and deliberate, carrying with it the weight of every life she had ever held, and the fragile hope of saving one more. The air at the bottom of the pit felt different, heavier, damp with a cold that seemed older than the mountain itself. When her boots finally touched solid ground, her legs nearly gave out, knees buckling as pain shot upward through joints that had no business being asked for this much anymore. She steadied herself with one hand against the ice wall, breathing hard, lungs burning as if she had swallowed the winter whole. For a moment, she simply stood there, eyes closed, listening to her own heartbeat echo inside her ears like a warning drum. The cub was closer now. Close enough that she could see the fine details, the frost clinging to its whiskers, the shallow rise and fall of its chest, the way its paws twitched weakly as if it were dreaming of running somewhere warm and endless. Its eyes tracked her every movement, fear and exhaustion mingling into something fragile and raw. It tried to stand when she took a step forward, slipped immediately, and collapsed with a soft, defeated sound that tightened something painfully inside her. "It's all right," she whispered, though her voice shook. She lowered herself carefully onto one knee, ignoring the sharp protest from her body. The cold seeped through fabric instantly, biting deep, but she welcomed the pain. It meant she was still present, still capable. She reached out slowly, palm open, giving the cub time to see her, to understand that she was not another threat in a world already full of them. The cub hissed weakly, more reflex than defiance, then went still. Its strength was nearly gone. When her fingers finally brushed its fur, she felt how thin it was beneath the spotted coat, how fragile the warmth inside had become. It was lighter than she expected, heartbreakingly so. She slid her other hand beneath its chest, supporting its weight, careful not to startle it. The cub's breathing hitched, then settled into shallow, rapid bursts against her wrist. She pulled off her shawl with stiff fingers and wrapped it gently around the cub, tucking the fabric close to its body. The warmth of her own scent clung to the wool, years of smoke and home embedded in the fibers. As she did, memories surfaced unbidden, of swaddling newborns, of rocking sick children through endless nights, of the instinctive way her body had always known how to shelter something smaller than itself. She had thought those days were behind her. The mountain had proven her wrong. Lifting the cub was harder than she anticipated. Her arm shook violently as she gathered it against her chest, the weight not heavy in any ordinary sense, but immense in responsibility. She could feel its heart fluttering, fast and uneven, a small, stubborn rhythm refusing to stop. She pressed her chin lightly against its head, eyes burning, and took a steadying breath. The climb back up felt impossible almost immediately. Her muscles screamed as she tightened her grip on the rope, one hand at a time, boots scraping uselessly against ice. The cub stirred in her arms, making a faint, breathy sound that drove panic through her veins. She adjusted her hold instinctively, cradling it closer, shielding it from the sharp edges of the pit wall with her own body. Halfway up, her strength faltered again. Her arms trembled uncontrollably, vision blurring at the edges as exhaustion threatened to pull her under. She paused, forehead pressed against the rope, tears freezing on her lashes. For the first time, doubt cut deep. What if she couldn't make it? What if she had come all this way only to fail now? The cub shifted, pressing weakly against her chest, its warmth faint but real. The contact grounded her more firmly than any thought ever could. She gritted her teeth, letting out a sound that was half sob, half growl, and pulled again, inch by inch, breath by breath. The mountain resisted, but she did not stop. When her hand finally reached the rim, fingers clawing at snow and rock, a broken laugh escaped her lips. She heaved herself up with the last of her strength, collapsing onto the frozen ground as the sky spun overhead. For a long moment, she lay there gasping, the cub still clutched to her chest, the wind rushing past as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. But something had. She felt it in the way the cub's breathing slowly steadied, in the way the cold seemed to loosen its grip just a little. Against all reason, against age and fear and the indifference of the mountain, they were both still alive. The wind had softened by the time she managed to sit up, as if the mountain itself were watching quietly now, deciding whether to interfere further. Snow dusted her hair and shoulders, melting slowly where it touched her skin. Every part of her ached, deep, bone-level pain that pulsed with each breath. But she welcomed it. Pain meant she had made it back. Pain meant she was still here. The cub lay bundled against her chest, small and impossibly light, its body rising and falling in shallow but steadier breaths. She loosened her grip just enough to look at it. Its eyes were half closed now, no longer wild with terror, lashes damp with melted frost. It did not struggle. It did not cry. It simply existed in the fragile space between survival and surrender. She brushed her thumb gently along its head, careful, reverent, as if touching something sacred. She knew she couldn't stay long. The cold was still dangerous, still eager. With slow, deliberate movements, she pushed herself to her feet, swaying slightly as dizziness washed over her. The horizon tilted, then settled. She adjusted the shawl again, securing the cub close to her body, letting what little warmth she had left flow into it. Every step back toward her small stone house felt longer than the last, boots sinking into snow that had begun to glow faintly with the promise of late afternoon light. The world seemed strangely quiet as she walked. No birds, no distant animal call, only the crunch of snow beneath her feet and the steady rhythm of her breathing. She became acutely aware of her age then, not as a weakness but as a weight of experience carried forward into this moment. Each step was a negotiation between will and exhaustion. She stumbled once, catching herself just in time, heart lurching violently. The cub stirred, making a soft sound that sent a surge of panic through her. "It got you," she whispered, voice hoarse. The words were not loud, but they were absolute. Her house appeared gradually through the white, its low stone walls half buried, smoke long gone from the chimney. She fumbled with the door latch, fingers stiff and clumsy, then pushed inside. The air was still cold, but calmer, sheltered. She laid the cub gently near the hearth and moved quickly, faster than she thought she could, stacking wood, striking a flame. When the fire finally caught, its crackle sounded almost unreal, a warm, living thing blooming into the room. She sat beside the cub, feeding small pieces of cloth closer to the fire, warming them before tucking them back around its body. The cub shivered less now, its breathing evened out, tiny chest rising with more confidence. She watched it like she once watched her children, counting breaths without realizing she was doing it, fear easing with each one that came and went. Hours passed without her noticing. Outside, the light faded, the mountains darkening into silhouettes against a sky streaked faintly with color. Inside, warmth returned slowly, painfully, to her limbs. She wrapped her arms around her knees and allowed herself, finally, to feel what she had pushed aside all day. Her hands trembled again, not from cold this time, but from the aftershock of fear and relief colliding. She laughed softly, a sound edged with disbelief. "A 75, she murmured to the empty room. "And still you find trouble." The cub shifted, letting out a small, almost questioning sound. She smiled then, tears blurring her vision, and reached out to rest her hand near it, not touching, just close enough to be felt. Outside, the mountains stood silent and immense, but inside that small stone room, something gentle had survived. And as the fire burned steadily and the night settled in, she understood that this rescue was not just the saving of a life. It was the quiet reminder that her own still had purpose left to give. The night deepened outside her windows, the cold pressing itself against stone as if trying to reclaim what had slipped through its grasp. Inside, the fire cracked inside, throwing warm light across the room in slow, breathing waves. Shadows climbed the walls and settled into corners where memories liked to hide. She fed another piece of wood into the hearth, watching the flames take it eagerly, the way life always did when given even the smallest chance. The cub slept now, not the fragile half-sleep of exhaustion, but something deeper. Its body had relaxed, paws no longer curled tight with tension, tail resting loosely against the cloth. Each breath came slower, fuller. She found herself holding her own breath in rhythm with it, afraid to disrupt the fragile peace that had settled between them. She sat on the floor beside the hearth, back against the stone, joints stiffening as the adrenaline finally drained away. That was when the shaking began. It started in her hands, a subtle tremor she tried to ignore, then spread through her arms, her shoulders, down into her legs. The weight of what she had done crashed into her all at once. The pit, the rope burning her palms, the moment her strength had nearly failed. She bowed her head, pressing her forehead into her hands, breath hitching as tears finally broke free. They fell silently onto the floor, dark spots against the stone. She did not cry often anymore. Life had taught her to ration tears, to save them for moments that truly demanded them. This was one of those moments. "I was so close," she whispered into the quiet, voice breaking. "Not close to death, close to giving up." The admission felt heavy and honest in the firelit room. She had stood on the edge of that pit and felt the full weight of her years pressed down on her. She had wanted, just for a heartbeat, to turn away and let the mountain decide. The shame of that thought still burned even as relief washed over it. A soft sound drew her attention back. The cub stirred, eyes fluttering open briefly, unfocused but calm. It made a small rumbling noise, not quite a purr, not quite a cry, and shifted closer to the warmth. Something in her chest loosened then, a knot she hadn't realized had been there for years. She reached out and rested her hand lightly against the floor near the cub. The heat from the fire warmed her skin, and the cub's presence warmed something deeper. She remembered another night long ago, sitting by a different fire, holding her husband's hand as the world quietly prepared to take him. How powerless she had felt then, how final that moment had been. This was different. This time she had acted. This time, the ending was still being written. Outside, the wind rose briefly, rattling the door, then faded again. The mountain had not won today. She allowed herself a small, tired smile. By morning she knew she would need to do more. The cub could not stay here. Snow leopards belonged to the wild, to high ridges and open sky, not stone houses and human hands. She would have to walk to the ranger station miles away, alert those who could reunite the cub with its mother or take it somewhere safe. The thought exhausted her, but it did not frighten her. She had already crossed the hardest distance. As dawn crept in, pale and tentative, the fire burned low. She rose stiffly and added more wood, moving carefully, respectfully, as if every action mattered now in a way it hadn't before. Light filtered through the small window, catching the cub's spotted fur and turning it silver and gold. Its eyes opened fully this time, clearer, steadier. For the first time, it looked at her without fear. They regarded each other in silence, an old woman with a lifetime etched into her face, and a young creature standing at the fragile beginning of its own. No understanding passed between them in words, but something quieter and more enduring did. A recognition, a shared survival. She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders and sat back down, watching the cub breathe, the fire glow, the morning arrive. The mountain loomed outside, vast and unchanged, but inside that small room, warmth held its ground. And in the steady light of a new day, she knew that neither of them would ever forget the moment when the cold almost won, and didn't that morning arrived without ceremony. No sudden burst of sunlight, no triumphant sky, just a slow thinning of darkness, the kind that creeps in quietly and asks permission. Pale light spilled across the snow outside her window, softening the hard edges of the mountain. The fire had burned low, embers glowing like tired eyes. She stirred from where she had slept sitting upright, joints stiff, body heavy, but spirit strangely alert. The cub was awake. It stood unsteadily near the hearth, legs wobbling as if unsure the ground would hold. When it noticed her movement, it froze, muscles tensing, instinct flaring for a heartbeat. Then it relaxed, not fully, but enough. That alone felt miraculous. She watched it take a cautious step, then another, tail low but no longer tucked in fear. Life was returning quietly, stubbornly. She brewed weak tea and drank it slowly, the warmth sliding down into her chest. Every muscle complained when she stood, but she ignored it. Pain had become a familiar companion over the years. Persistent, honest, manageable. She wrapped the cub again, gentler now, and prepared for the walk. The ranger station was far. The path was unforgiving. But the weather had eased, and the mountain, for once, seemed willing to allow passage. Before leaving, she paused at the doorway. The house felt different, fuller somehow, as if it had witnessed something it would remember long after she was gone. She ran her hand along the stone wall, grounding herself, then stepped outside. The journey was slow. Her breath fogged the air with each step, boots crunching rhythmically through fresh snow. The cub rested against her chest, head tucked in, eyes half lit. Occasionally it shifted, adjusting, trusting the steady beat beneath it. That trust weighed on her more than any physical burden. She had not been trusted like this in a long time. Halfway there, the wind picked up again, tugging at her coat, testing her resolve. She leaned forward into it, stubborn, unyielding. She had walked through worse storms than this. Storms of grief, of loneliness, of years stretching too quietly ahead. This was only weather. When the ranger station finally came into view, low and practical against the vastness of the land, relief washed through her so strongly she had to stop and steady herself. A young ranger rushed out when he saw her, eyes widening at the sight she carried. Words tumbled out, questions, concern, disbelief. She answered simply, calmly, as if recounting an ordinary day. Because in a way, it was. This was what life had always been for her, seeing something that needed help and deciding not to turn away. They took the cub carefully, reverently. A veterinarian was called. Plans were made, tracking the mother, preparing a safe return, ensuring the cub's strength. She stood quietly to the side as they worked, hands clasped in front of her watching. When the cub was placed into a warm enclosure, it turned its head once, just slightly, eyes meeting hers through the glass. That look stayed with her. By the time she began the walk home, the sun was higher, light glittering across the snow like scattered promises. Her steps were slower now, exhaustion settling deep, but her chest felt light. Empty in a good way. The mountains stretched endlessly around her, unchanged, eternal. She was small within it. She always had been. But she had learned something important at the edge of that frozen pit. Age did not make her invisible. It did not disqualify her from meaning. Back at her stone house, she built a small fire and sat by it, hands wrapped around a cup that had long gone cold. Outside, the wind moved through the peaks, carrying on as it always would. Somewhere out there, a snow leopard mother would search, and soon she would find. She closed her eyes, breathing in the quiet, the warmth, the ache of a body well used. And for the first time in many years, the future did not feel like something she was simply waiting to reach its end. It felt open, then wide, like the mountains themselves, harsh, beautiful, and still full of paths worth walking.